Rabbi Elazar said a good lave, which we think means a good heart. And then Rabbi Yochanan said to them, I prefer Rabbi Elazar's words, for they include all of your ideas. So a good lave, which we think is a heart. A good heart, we assume probably means a person of good character, person of feeling, a person of sensitivity. Basically encompasses all the others. Then he said, what is the evil way that a man should avoid? He asked his students. So they said the opposite. Eliezer said an evil eye, right? We know, we talk about the eye in horror when we look at other people with jealousy or with envy is the evil eye. It's looking at people in a bad way. Rabbi Yeshua said an evil companion. Rabbi Yossi said an evil neighbor. Rabbi Shimon said one who borrows and doesn't pay back. And he quotes from Psalms there. And Rabbi Elazar says an evil, a bad heart, a lave. And he said to Rabbi Yochanan said, I prefer Elazar's words to yours because they include yours. Okay, so he seems to have 5 favored students, and Elazar ben Aro seems to be a particular favorite. Okay, let's just ask an obvious question. Did Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Akiva, we just marked the sphere, and Rabbi Akiva lost 24,000 students, we're told in the plague then. So 5 students doesn't seem like very many. So first of all, let's look at this page from the Talmud. This is Rosh Hashanah. Okay, the top is the name of the tractates in the Talmud that we're looking at. So it says, isn't it taught in a Braita? A Braita is, you have a Mishnah, which is a attributed teaching, and a Braita is slightly more informal. So it'll say, there's a Braita, it was written down somewhere, it doesn't always say who it was, or it's not in a formal structure. So this is what was taught. All the years of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is alive for 120 years. That's good, by the way, right? We know. 40 years in business to achieve financial independence and study Torah. 40 years of studying Torah and 40 years of teaching Torah. You want to tell me that in 40 years of teaching, you only had 5 students? Right? That, such a classroom ratio never existed in history, and I doubt it would exist today, even with all the social distancing. I mean, social distancing is one thing. They're talking about having 8 kids in a class somehow in a room. I don't know how they can do that instead of 32 or whatever. Catherine might know more about that. But 5 students over 40 years is really a social distancing. That's number 1. Number 2, here it says in Pesachim that they would say about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he would sit in the street by the Temple Mount in the shade of the sanctuary, and he would expound. He would give long drushes to a large number of people all day long. So he had a large following. And not only that, but he had other students. Here's a story from Brachot. There was an incident involving Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa. He wasn't mentioned in the Mishnah. He went to study Torah before Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. When Rabbi Yochanan's son got ill, he said to Chanina, my son, he treated him like a son. He was such a special student. Pray for mercy on behalf of my actual son so that he will live. And it says Chanina placed his head between his knees and meditated. Rabbi Yochanan's son lived. So clearly a special student, not mentioned in the Mishnah. Here's another one. There was a Bryce in Bava Basra. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to his students, my sons. It's nice, he calls them his sons. Right? What is the meaning of that which it says, and he quotes a certain verse. It doesn't matter what the verse is, but we see who answered. Rabbi Eliezer, he was mentioned. Rabbi Yeshua, he was mentioned. Rabbi Gamliel, he wasn't mentioned. Rabbi Nechoya ben Hakana, he wasn't mentioned. So he clearly had other students. And also, again, why are we comparing students? You know, it's not healthy. So we have to look a little bit. Clearly, something doesn't make sense. First of all, we had more than 5 students. Secondly, why single out those students? Something doesn't make sense. So let's just have a look at Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's actual historical role. He was a prominent leader before the destruction of the Second Temple. When it became clear that Jerusalem was going to fall to the Romans and the temple be destroyed, he was the one that basically started planning for a post-Churban, a post-destruction temple reality. We'll see in a minute what the Gemara says in Gittin. You know, we're living through strange times. There's a chap called Dr. Russell Hook who once gave a seminar to United Rabbis and Rebbitzins about change management. Right? We all know, anyone who's familiar with the whole process of change, particularly in organizations, it's always hard. Nobody likes to change. Change management is difficult. And he spoke about change management in religious organizations. And he said, I think he's a Christian theologian originally, and he said that the greatest example ever of a shift, a complete shift in religious thinking, is from a temple-based Judaism to a synagogue and community-based Judaism. In the times of the temple, I mean, it seems they did have some kind of gathering. Not everyone went to the temple all the time. Whether they had shuls or gatherings, they certainly had yeshivas and places for learning. But everything, we were pilgrim-centered religion, where everything centered on Jerusalem and the temple. After the destruction of the temple, we successfully changed our thinking. Our whole religion, our whole practice changed from being a temple-centered, pilgrimage-centered religion based around a huge building to becoming localized. Right? We devolved. Everybody said that the Mikdash Ma'at, the miniature sanctuary, is our homes and our synagogue. Right? So successful were we in that paradigm shift that people say it's more important to go to shul even if you have to drive on Shabbat. Why? Because of this idea of the shul. So we've gone from a temple Judaism. The Torah never speaks about shuls. It speaks about the Mishkan and ultimately the temple. Right? The prophets, I don't think, speak about shuls. Shul is a modern concept. Right? Here we are with our shuls closed and we're saying, what do we do? But actually, we've had this before. We've had paradigm shifts. And we made it successfully, and somehow we'll make it successfully through this one as well. That suddenly we're not in shul anymore, we're home. There's been another change. But it's always happened in Judaism. So in Rabbi Yochanan's time, the temple was on the verge of destruction by the Romans. Right? Life as they know it was coming to an end. I have a friend who at his Pesach Seder was asked to say, he's like a traditional guy, he was asked to say a few words a number of years ago. And he basically said that the way that we see the Shoah now as the biggest tragedy we can imagine, some of that is because it's a huge tragedy, and some of it is because we're still relatively close. I don't know if in 300 years' time people will have the same view. And my friend said, he said at his Seder table, for the people living straight after the destruction of the temple, it must have been the same magnitude. Right? The whole world has come crumbling down, basically. So amongst all that, you've got Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and what did he do? And by the way, he was criticized for this. Right? This is why Yavna School is called Yavna. This is why Yavna is associated with education. This is the story. He had a connection with Vespasian. And Vespasian, so, it's often the case. They're on opposing sides, but there's a respect there. So Vespasian comes to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and he says, the Gemara tells this story in Gittin. We read this on Tisha B'Av, by the way, often. He said, I'm going to Rome to accept the new position of emperor. And someone else will continue besieging the city and waging the war, right? So there's somebody else that's going to take over from me as general. But before I leave, I ask something of me that I can give you, right? They had a friendship. They had a respect for one another. So Vespasian says, Rabbi Yochanan, I'll do one thing for you. And Rabbi Yochanan said to him, give me Yavna and its sages, right? Give me this outpost of rabbis, of scholars, do not destroy it, and spare the dynasty of Rabban Gamliel, do not kill them. Right? Give me this one enclave of scholars that I should keep Judaism going. I didn't put the rest of the Gemara here, but he was criticized because people say, well, could have asked for something more, I don't know, perhaps that would have spared more Jewish lives. But this is what he asked for. Right? You need somewhere a seat of learning, a seat of education. If you get rid of all the learning and all the scholarship, then there's no one to teach and no one to pass on. So this is what's going on. Rabbi Yochanan didn't live in a bubble or an ivory tower. He lived at very difficult times. As for Rabban Gamliel, let's just be clear who Rabban Gamliel was. He had led the Sanhedrin for generations. So after the destruction of the temple, Rabbi Yochanan, right, was proactive. He didn't sit and cry. He may have done, but he enacted new ideas that the teaching has to continue no matter what. You have to continue the chain of tradition. So now let's go back to his students a minute, if it will let me. Okay, let's go back to students. Of course, he had more than 5 students, and I'm sure they all had different qualities. But in Pirkei Avot, obviously, he felt that this is coming at a time when they're rebuilding Jewish life after the destruction of the temple, and Rabbi Yochanan was a leader, and he was a visionary, and he clearly felt that there were important messages in each of these types of behavior that had to be recorded for posterity. It's the new normal. Right? We talk about in an hour, the new normal will be nobody shakes hands, or people stand apart from each other, or we don't go to shul, or whatever the new normal is. We're all wearing face masks, right? Things are changing. The new normal will be that more things are online, even when we get back to real life. Is he buried in Meron? Shimon Bar Yochai is buried in Meron. Yochanan ben Zakkai is buried somewhere in the north, I think. And people go to his tomb. I'm not sure who. I'm not sure where. We can check that. So the reason he singles out these 5 is because this is the new reality. This is the new paradigm, the new normal. Right? You have to change. Does he want to change? Of course he doesn't want. No one wants the temple destroyed. Right? But that's the reality. So it's not about the students better than the other. It's about saying we can learn something. And when we can learn something, we have to learn something. And which are the personal qualities and midot and character traits which are best going to help people in exile when they're dispersed and the temple is destroyed? So let's have a look at these. So what's the first student he mentions? Rabbi Eliezer. He says Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus was a plastered cistern which didn't lose a drop. What does that mean? Someone who has all the traditions, all the teachings from Sinai through to the present, and he's a faithful transmitter of those traditions. One second. We've got the wrong order here. Sorry, something's gone in the wrong order for some reason. Okay. And interestingly, he's somebody that always said things in the name of the people he heard them from. Here's a quote from Sukkah. This is speaking about Rabbi Eliezer. He said, "In all my days, no one ever got to the study hall before me. I was always first. I never slept there, not even a brief nap. I never left anyone there and exited. In other words, I was always the last one there. I never wasted my time with idle conversation. I discussed only necessary matters or matters of Torah. And, underlined, I never said anything I did not hear from my teacher." Right? So he was a faithful student. Everything he said was the teachings that he'd heard from his teachers. Right? He never forgot a single thing. And then when you ask him, what is the most important quality? Rabbi Eliezer says a good eye. Okay, we normally understand a good eye as being generous. But it could also mean, right, someone's got a good eye for detail, quite literally, we say in English. So a good eye is someone who's got attention to detail, right? The details of his learning. He doesn't forget anything. He retains everything. Right? What's the best quality? A good eye. Good eye doesn't necessarily mean judgment. It means like you've got a good eye for detail. Very specific, very precise. Because you have to be precise. If you're going to hand down tradition, there's no point in messing it up, right? If you're going to hand your grandma's chicken soup recipe down to your grandchildren, you get the quantities wrong, it's not going to work. Simple as that. That's Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Yochanan feels that in a post-temple world, where now it's all in the books and the teachings that get handed down, and we're spread all over the world in different communities, and the oral Torah has to be written down or it will be forgotten, you need accuracy and precision. That is what will keep the chain of tradition going, the Masorah, the tradition. Right, what does he say of Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Joshua? He says, happy is the woman who gave birth to him. Just to clarify, it says elsewhere in the Jerusalem Talmud, Rabbi Yeshua's mother as a child would bring him to the base medrash, so from an early age, the first thing he would hear was the sounds of Torah learning. And so it's a tribute to his mother and the role that she played. But more than that, though, what does it mean? Happy is the lady that gave birth to him. It means obviously nachas. Let's have a look. It says in the Gemara in Yuma, Abaye said, when it says in the Shema, you shall love the Lord your God, what does that actually mean? So he said it means you shall make the name of heaven beloved. It's reflexive. You shall cause God's name to be beloved by others. It's going to be my share Thursday night, by the way, about Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying God's name in public. How should one do so? Read Torah, learn Mishnah, serve Torah scholars, be pleasant with people in one's business dealings. What do people say of such a person? They say, Ashrei, fortunate is the father who taught them Torah, fortunate is the teacher who taught them Torah, and I missed the next quote, fortunate is the woman that gave birth to them. In his case, his mother was the one that gave him access to Torah as well. So fortunate is the one who taught them Torah. Okay, I must confess, I changed the him here to them, because it's a lady share, but we could change father to the one as well. Fortunate is the one who taught them Torah, right? Praiseworthy, it's nachas, when people are enamored with a person. So happy is the woman that gave birth to him. Why does Rabbi Yochanan say that? Because Rabbi Yeshua was somebody that caused people, nachas, his parents, through his behavior and his dealings, were scrupulous. And someone who makes a positive impression on the people around him. What was Rabbi Yeshua's story? So he was actually the one that had to guide the Jews in the post-temple era. We find here in the Talmud, is Rabbi Yeshua said to them, my children come, I will tell you how we should act. To not mourn is impossible. the decree was issued, the temple was destroyed. But to mourn excessively is also impossible. And he goes on to list, for example, if anyone's come across, there is a custom that if you build a new house, you're supposed to leave a small corner somewhere that's not decorated. The phrase is in memory of the destruction of the temple. We always joke, and certainly in large families, there's always at least one corner that the paint's peeling. But the Gemara goes on to spell out certain things one can do that are symbolic. In Jerusalem, they still don't have live music in the old city at Simchas for this reason. We know that when one gets up from Shiva at the end of 7 days, and you don't wait till the end of the last day, you get up at the beginning of the last day to show that we're not lengthening the suffering. We know that after Shloshim, there are certain restrictions that are lifted. After 11 and 12 months, there are restrictions that are lifted. And if a person says, no, I'm going to sit Shiva for the rest of my life, okay, I'm not going to listen to music ever again because it won't be the same. I'm going to grow my hair. I'm not going to go to Simchas. I'm going to say Kaddish for more than 12 months, right? Then that's not healthy. There's the same way that we have to mourn, there's also a framework, there's a limit. So Rabbi Yeshua said to them, I know you're mourning for the temple, but temper your mourning, moderate it. We have to move on. And he actually managed that process with the people at the time. He also had relationships with the government officials, right? Here's a story. The Roman emperor said to Rabbi Yeshua, why does the smell of a Shabbos food spread so far, right? You know, you smell the cholent all around the place, the building, whatever. So he said to him, we have a certain spice called dill, which we place in our cooked dishes, and the fragrance diffuses, the smell spreads. So the emperor said to him, give us some of it. So he said back to him, if you keep Shabbos, the spice works. But if you're not Shabbos observant, the spice doesn't work. Okay, this is a piece of banter. They're having a laugh. You imagine them sitting down at having a drink together. And the emperor says to him, come on, tell me, what's the secret of your cholent? He says, we put dill in it. The emperor says, give me some. He says, it won't work. Only works if you keep Shabbos. It's banter, right? It's light-hearted. This is the conversation Rabbi Yeshua is having with the Roman emperor. So he has good relationships, right? He managed the relationships with the Jewish community and even had good relationships with the Roman authorities. Okay, here's an interesting story, which I've cut off the rest. So it says that there was a certain matter that the Torah scholars needed help with. They had to discuss an issue with basically the government in Rome, but they wanted some advice on how to deal with it. Who do you go to for advice on how to reach a man? You go to his mistress. So there was a certain matron, says the Gemara, whose company was kept by the prominent people of Rome. So the rabbis wanted to go to her and basically get advice on, where's the Achilles heel? What's the best way to approach the government? And they said, who can go? Rabbi Yeshua said, I'll go. Okay, and it tells in detail how he went there and did it in such a way that nobody could suspect he was actually consorting with her. And his students asked him all kinds of, it's an interesting story. But the bottom line is, he was clearly a worldly person who was a diplomat. He, first of all, had to rebuild society because people were mourning the temple and temper that mourning. But also he clearly had good relationships with people. Whereas Rabbi Yeshua was the one who said, when they was asked, what's the best quality that you can have, right? He was the one that said a good companion. So clearly companionship and relationships was his thing. Who's next? Rabbi Yossi was the one who said a good neighbor. So a neighbor is not just someone you have a professional relationship with or a political relationship with. A neighbor is somebody that you live with in your daily life, in your society. Right? You could be a good friend and a bad neighbor. So having neighborly relationships is the key to righteous society. Not just to be a good companion, but a good neighbor. Rabbi Yossi was a pious man, as we said, right? That's how Rabbi Yochanan described him. A pious man goes beyond the letter of the law in being neighborly to others and being a good neighbor, right? You can have, somebody says, I'm allowed to put my music on till 11 o'clock at night. That's the law. Okay, but someone next door has just had a baby and they're trying to sleep. So the good neighborly thing to do is to go beyond the letter of the law. So that's Rabbi Yossi, and very important, particularly in any society, but especially in a post-temple society. And obviously, conversely, being a bad neighbor, says Rabbi Yossi, isn't good. So Rabbi Yossi, we're told, was what was the phrase it used? A good neighbor. What was the phrase that he used for him? A pious man. So a pious man is somebody that cares to go beyond the letter of the law in one's relationships with one's family and one's neighbors. What was the next one? Rabbi Shimon is described as fearing sin. What's the deal with being fearful of sin? Again, it's a sense of piety. It's not just fear of sin that God's going to punish me. It's fear of sin in the sense that it leads to all kinds of problems in society and in Jewish life. Let's have a look. This is also Pikabot. It says that a bore is not sin-fearing. A bore is a brute. It's a person that has no refinement. It says an ignorant person can't be pious. A timid person can't learn. So let's just look at the beginning there. A person can be God-fearing and still be an unpleasant person. What does it mean here when it says a brute? Basically means a very coarse, animalistic person is not sin-fearing. They might be fearful of God's punishment, but they don't fear the consequences to society. So Rabbi Shimon is fearful not just of sin, but of the consequence of sin, the impact it has, particularly obviously at a high level. If someone in a position lacks piety, then that is particularly damaging. And finally, let's look at Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. So Rabbi Elazar ben Arach was compared to a flowing spring. And when he was asked what's the most important thing a person should do, Rabbi Elazar said a good heart, and Rabbi Yochanan said that includes all the others, right? The others said a good eye, a good companion, a good neighbor, to have foresight. And Rabbi Yochanan says your words of having a good lave, we'll see what that means in a minute, covers all of them. Then he said the opposite as well, having a bad lave covers all of them. So first of all, what is a spring? That it's so important. And secondly, what is a lave? Let's have a look. So Elazar ben Arach, what's an ever-flowing spring? So the chief rabbi has his mayanot, they call them, the female educators. A mayan is a spring that gives constant water, a natural spring. We talk about often the mayanot of Torah, the springs of Torah that are constantly giving out water. I'm nearly done, by the way, then we'll throw the floor open and unmute everyone. So what's a spring? It's something that's kind of creative, constantly coming up with new ways and new ideas. Right? And when he's asked what's the ideal path in life, Rabbi Elazar says a good lave. A lave is usually translated as a heart. Some of the commentaries say it might also mean the mind, being creative and original. So I'm not sure exactly why they read that into it, but they read that the lave could also mean the mind. So I'm not exactly sure why, but you have to be somebody who is a spring, who gives out new ideas, and who's creative. So as Rabbi Elazar, the most important thing is to have a good mind, a good head, a powerhouse of thought, to have good ideas, especially in a time when things were changing rapidly and they had to come up with new ideas. Right? Creativity, originality. How are you going to inspire people? The temple's gone now. You need new ways to inspire people. Okay? Personal challenge I'm going through and starting to think about is that in the next few months we're going to have Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. It's not going to be normal. However we do it, it's not going to be normal. And as a rabbi, I'm going to have to find ways to somehow inspire people that the usual presumptions aren't going to be enough. That we have nice davening and we finish on time and we have some take at the Kiddush and I go to everyone and say good Yom Tov and make sure to have a quick chat with everyone and blow the shofar and manage to hold my breath till the last fast and do a nice sermon that's not too long and that captivates everyone. It's quite possible most people won't be there. So how are we going to find ways to inspire people at home over the next few months or years so that we don't lose, in the same way that when the temple was destroyed, they had to make sure they didn't lose the momentum of Yiddishkeit. We have the same problem now. I have to say it's very challenging. I don't have all the answers, but I can relate to this very much. You have to have creativity and originality, otherwise we're stuck. So according to Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, in a time when everything's changing, the temple's been destroyed, Yiddishkeit is changing, the face of Judaism is changing, and you have to manage that change. Somebody who is a spring, a wellspring of creativity is exactly what you need. You need a good mind, a good head, a good eye to figure things out. It's important to have all the other qualities, says Rabbi Yochanan. You know what? Or sorry, Abba Shaul says that actually that's the most important thing of all. And that's what Rabbi Yochanan would learn from his own experiences. He was around at the time of the destruction of the temple. He was in conversation with Roman leaders. He was the one that had to negotiate Yavna and its sages to preserve the Torah. So he lived through this transformation himself. So when he's asked to cast his eye over his, or he's not asked, he decides that he wants to teach us some lessons from his students, then he says, you know, this is what I learned from my students, and this is the best quality of all right now. That doesn't mean he's negating the rest of his students. If I say, oh, my son taught me something amazing the other day, doesn't mean my other kids don't teach me things, right? You know, it's the classic thing. You know, you're not allowed any winners nowadays. Everyone's a winner. Everyone gets a prize because otherwise they're going to be sad and traumatized for life. No, you can praise somebody over somebody else. You just have to do it in the right way. Now, we're not putting down the rest of his students. He's saying right now, in the times we're living, here is what you can learn from these students. And Elazar ben Arach says the most important thing is to have a good heart, which could mean a good mind, a good head, to be creative, to be big-hearted, to be flexible. I also just want to come back to the point also I missed somehow about chesed. Just come back to this. Got out of order. Sorry. When we're talking about good heart and good eyes. So the story that says the world is built on chesed, on acts of kindness, because it says in Hosea, I desire kindness, not an offering. God says, I want kindness. The world was created from the beginning with kindness. It says in the Psalms, I told you the world is built on kindness and the heavens established on faith. So now the story about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He left Jerusalem and Rabbi Yeshua followed after him. Right? This is Rabbi Yeshua going back. Sorry, because I missed this out and this is quite important. Rabbi Yeshua was the one that we said was praiseworthy is his mother, right? He brought nachas to his parents from his public acts. He was very pious and very principled. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai left Jerusalem, Rabbi Yeshua followed after him. And he saw the temple in a state of destruction. Rabbi Yeshua said, woe to us, oi, this is destroyed, the place where our sins are forgiven. Right? What are we going to do now for atonement? And Rabbi Yochanan said to him, my son, my student, do not be distressed. We have a form of atonement just like it. What is it? Acts of kindness. As it says in the Psalms, I desire kindness, not offerings. And we find that Daniel, a precious man, would busy himself with acts of kindness, and it goes on to quote a whole lot of places there. So just interestingly, in this post-temple paradigm, right, the world stands on acts of kindness. Chesed is very important there. I forgot to mention that earlier. So the point here is, Rabbi Yochanan is not negating all his students. He could have more students, but he's living in a certain time, a certain place. And what is the single most important thing, says Rabbi Yochanan? The single most important thing is creativity, is to be an ever-flowing spring, is to have solutions to problems, because that's what we were going through then, just like what we're going through now. And we have to find creative ways and challenges. Says Rabbi Yochanan, having that good mind, that good heart to work on it, he says that's the most important quality. Look, we're not living through the same trauma as the destruction of the temple. We're certainly living through very strange times and the same questions of life. That it's all very well having qualities, but one of the most important qualities we're going to find clearly is going to be our ability to adapt, come up with creative solutions. At the same time, Rabbi Eliezer was the one who was like the system that doesn't lose a drop. We somehow have to maintain the tradition, and there is always the challenge. It's the Zoom Seder question. It's how we maintain the tradition, the authenticity of Judaism, as it's always been practiced, whilst at the same time adapting to the paradigms of the times we live in. And that creative thinking, that ability to shift and to change is going to be basically our challenge now, like any other time. So that's what Rabbi Yochanan is telling us about his students in the Mishnah, particularly the one that he praises over the others. There are qualities we can learn from all of them, which are particularly pertinent to times of galut and times of exile, which applies now as well. But there are also very important qualities when it comes to paradigm shifts and change management, which again is extremely relevant now. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I would now love to hear from other people because I've been talking for a long time and it's very strange just being so silent.
Just one. Oh.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
You can hear you fine. Yeah.
Oh, just one thought. But when you were talking about, I can't remember which rabbi it was that says that he was a very good student and he was the first in and the last out, and he only spoke what his teachers said. That means he couldn't have had much thought of his own. And surely we've always, like in yeshivas, they question things.
It's a very good question. So I suppose you have your right brain and your left brain, and the right brain is creative and the left side is, what is it, more sort of orderly and methodical. So I guess that's why Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Elazar are two different people. Rabbi Eliezer's strength is that he's a sponge and he soaks everything up and he doesn't forget anything. But as you said, he soaks up other people's stuff. Rabbi Elazar is clearly more creative. He's a fountain that's giving out constantly. I guess you need both. You do need both. You need people that are slightly on the edge, that are more, that don't fit into the box. That's Rabbi Elazar. He's the constant flow of ideas. And you need people who are more kind of establishment, who, I always think Dead Poets Society, remembers that film, is a very good paradigm for like Jewish knowledge, and particularly for like when the Hasidic movement starting, you have people going out into the fields and learning sort of secret stuff, and the balance between conformity, which is important, and you need order and you need tradition and conformity, and being able to think out of the box, which is also important. So that's Rabbi Elazar, to think out of the box. But you're right. So maybe that's why he didn't come up with his own ideas, Rabbi Elazar, because he was very much a conformist. Perhaps he didn't know how to come up with his own ideas. I played the piano for many years. I'm a bit rusty now. I love jazz, but I find it very hard to actually play jazz. Why? Because I have classical training. When you're classical training, it's very formal. There are certain expectations of what you do. And in jazz, of course, you're much more free with what you do. It'd be like someone, presumably someone's trained in a particular method of painting or drawing, to then sort of adopt a more free method would be very hard. If you have public speaking training and you're very proper, to then have to speak in a more informal way is very difficult. So I guess it's different methods. But yeah, you're right. That's why they have different qualities and they both get praise. Catherine, can I ask you, are secondary schools doing the same as primary schools? Like 8 kids per room and this kind of thing?
I think the instructions say 15 children to a room.
Right. Oh, I can't unmute you. I'm trying to
Depends on the size of the room.
Right.
Yes, I think it must do.
I was quite bemused. Oh. I was quite.
Is there a lot of feedback when I talk?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Microphone.
I was quite bemused by that social distancing. 5 students over 40 years. I think that's quite a good ratio. Anyone else have anything to contribute? It's very strange not being in the same room. As good as Zoom is.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
what made you choose this topic for today?
Okay, it wasn't specific to ladies, but I just thought that it hit me particularly because we're living through times of paradigm shifts. The fact we're sitting here on Zoom now and not on Yom Tov afternoon in Debbie's house, I think we usually are, is in itself a sign of change. And look, for years people have been saying, oh, can we have online minyanim? And we've been saying, no, the whole point of community is to commune in person. And there was a church famously that started a virtual church and everyone stopped coming in person. And here we are and we're doing it. Why are we doing it? Out of necessity. And we're surviving, you know. I mean, ironically, obviously for the Orthodox, Shabbos and Yom Tov are more challenging because we don't have that ability, halachically. But I just felt it was, and also I just felt it was interesting, look at different qualities, and particularly this quality of being creative, basically. You know, we don't fit in a box. One of the best proverbs is, it says, "Chanach l'na'ar al pi darko." You should educate the child according to his way, right? The way that's best for him. And then it says, when he grows up, he'll keep it up. We don't do that enough. We still put kids into boxes and expect them all to fit into the same, you know. And if they want to do something a bit, you know, off the beaten track, we all panic, you know. Anyone know Andrew Mellish? Married Ruth Bookats from around here. Anyone know Andrew Mellish?
I know his wife.
Yeah, so he lives in Bourne Wood. So he trained as an accountant and he decided to become a plumber because he got fed up being an accountant and he's enjoying himself. I think he's one of the only from Jewish plumbers around. And you know, what's wrong with that? You know, people say, a plumber? Wait, you're an accountant? Why would you become a plumber? So, you know, we put people into boxes. You know, why would you become a rabbi? A lot of people say. So we put people into these boxes all the time, and that's not the way. So creative thinking and thinking out the box, and just the whole point of paradigm shift. That as centered as we are on our shuls and community centers, it wasn't always that way. It wasn't that way in the desert, and it wasn't that way in the times of the temple, and possibly it won't be that way in the future, which is a very difficult question to put out there.
It's a bit difficult to have the Tuesday Club online like this.
It's very difficult to have the Tuesday Club, and
And it's a tremendous loss to the people who come.
Right, so I think the social
people, there's been a tremendous. You see the people physically. You can see there's a change in their stance and in their ability to do things because they've lost that communication.
So in a way, I guess it's like everything else. Many of us probably research things online, we watch things online, we do things, we listen to teaching or lectures, or we do training online, we interact with people online. We're used to it. If you're the sort of person that is a self-motivated, I guess, learner slash social person online, then it's not such a big deal. For somebody who is used to face-to-face contact, I know we say, I've said it myself, a lot of people at lunch club, they're showing pictures of their grandchildren on their phones. That's a maybe, but they're still used to face contact, and it is very difficult. I get that. And that's probably going to be the last thing we can get back to, because those are the vulnerable categories. So even if we go back to school tomorrow, I don't know how.
But we could do half the people one week and half the people another week.
You say that, but if you physically imagine people being sufficiently distanced from each other, and then you think
we have 4 people to a table instead of 10 people to a table.
That's not 2 meters apart.
The diameter of the table is 6 foot.
I'm going to go in at some point and measure it, but I think you'd be lucky to get, in the whole shul area, I think you'd be lucky to get 50 people at the right distance, spaced out. Forget round tables.
Well, that's what I'm saying. We could have 40 people or 30 people one week and a different 30 people the next week.
I don't know, but yeah. So
yeah, but how are they going to get there?
Yeah,
well, some of them come
running
on the bus now.
So I don't know. So I'm not saying this paradigm shift works for everything, and it doesn't work for people not being with their grandparents and parents and whatever. But in terms of, at least I suppose, let's say the Jewish elements of the learning and the davening, we've had to adapt, and we've done it.
But have you not reached more people in many cases using Zoom? So you've got 13 participants this morning.
Yeah, the problem is you don't know. I've done it myself. I mean, the chief rabbi's got a thing for rabbis from 12 to 1 today. I said to Bill, oh, maybe I'll listen in the background while I clear my office. I wouldn't do that if it was real life, you know. If you look on Facebook, it says 200 people watched our davening this morning. I don't believe 200 people sat and watched 45 minutes of it. I think every single person that sees 1 second of it gets registered. So it's very hard to measure real engagement. You can say the same thing, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. People ensure they leave early, they come late, they're talking. It's also hard to measure. But it's Zoom, unless you're one-to-one, and all these things, is a slightly more peripheral kind of engagement. You can have it on the background while you're doing something else. Whereas when you're physically present at a gathering, you're more engaged. So it's not the answer. I don't believe it's the long term.
No, it's an alternative. It's an addition.
Right.
Because I probably wouldn't have come to your home, but I am happy to spend my hour sitting here because I can perhaps do another job at the same time.
Right.
You wouldn't be on a Tuesday because we'd be at the club.
Right.
So
yeah. So we sent out our bar mitzvah invitation. Everyone's replied that they're coming. Funny that. You know, ordinarily you'd have at least the people from outside London would say, "Oh, we can't make it." So in that sense, it's. My wife's grandparents actually responded saying, "We're so happy that we can join you. We wouldn't have been able to join you in person." And I said to them, "You know, I don't know why we don't normally stream things." The answer is because we've got in our minds that if something is live, it's too. People are starting to do, like, you know, webcams and Facebook Live and things at weddings and things, but it's never really taken off, and I think it will take off now because we know how to do it. So even if we're back in person, why shouldn't we have? Yes, you shouldn't be on your phone at a funeral for no reason, but to live stream a celebration or a shiur or even a service, if it's during the week, for those who can't make it, is that a bad idea? I don't think it's a bad idea. Be interesting to see how it plays out, I guess.
Okay.
Can we have services out of doors? Only if the weather's good.
The weather's been wonderful.
Yeah, but
yes, but as soon as we go back to normal, the weather will as well.
I think so, Iris. All right.
So you can't use the word normal because we don't know what normal is going to be in the future. But
Well,
first of
going
all,
out and having the shuls open and things like that.
First of all, you have security issues outdoors, and secondly, not everybody wants to stand in a car park in the Talisman to film. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, there's going to be maybe women won't be allowed to come back.
Well,
Because they want the space for the men.
In Israel, they initially said 10 people, and then they said 19, I think, and then they
50.
said
now they're doing weddings for 50 people in Israel.
Right.
Yes.
But there's
I'm reading what France is trying to do when they open the shuls. They said that most shuls have got an upstairs where the ladies go, and they're going to try and use that for the extra for the men, but they haven't opened yet.
And how are they going to do with public toilets when we reopen the shops?
Who knows? I don't think most people realise how far 2 meters is. It's further than you think.
The toilets in Sainsbury's are still open.
Yes, but if you were to go to a park, all the public toilets are closed.
Right. And like in Raynham, certainly in the gents, almost all the.
That's where
cubicles
they've
are
got
closed
public
off.
toilets.
So it's interesting if you look in Jewish tradition, whenever it talks about one's personal space. So, for example, there's a halacha that if somebody's in the middle of the Amidah, you're not supposed to sit down if you're within a certain radius of them. It's considered disrespectful. And what is that radius? That radius is 4 amot, and amot is a
Fist.
no,
From your elbow to your.
I can't remember what you call it. Like not a hand.
Cubit.
Yeah, it is a cubit. I'm trying to give the phrase in horse terms, like, you know, you have hands and you have arms. It's basically an arm's length. So very interestingly, an amah, a cubit, 4 cubits, is approximately 2 meters, which is really interesting. So for thousands of years in Jewish law, if you wanted to keep someone at arm's length, it was always 2 meters. And now actually that's what we find. So
Yeah.
it's interesting that this distance has some scientific significance as well. But there we go.